The Zephrian Empire stretched across 12 star systems and had ruled the Andromeda sector for over 3,000 years. Their home world, Zephyros Prime, was a sight that took the breath away from any visitor who saw it for the first time. Massive crystal spires reached up into the purple clouds, each one carved from a single piece of rare gemstone that sparkled in the light of their twin suns. The buildings seemed to grow from the ground like giant flowers, their surfaces smooth and perfect, reflecting the sky in ways that made them appear alive. But beneath all this beauty lay something dark and ugly. The Zephrians believed they were better than every other species in the galaxy. Their purple-scaled skin, their tall, thin bodies, their large golden eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. They thought these features made them special, chosen by the gods to rule over all others. Every other race was just a tool to be used, a servant to make their lives easier. Captain Jake Morrison had been on Zephyros Prime for 3 weeks now, sitting in endless meetings with Zephrian officials who treated him like he was some kind of trained animal doing tricks. He was here to work out a trade deal between Earth and the Zephrian Empire, something that would help both sides get what they needed. The humans wanted access to the rare metals that the Zephrians mined from their outer worlds. The Zephrians wanted human technology, especially the medical equipment that could extend their already long lives. Jake was a patient man. He had to be working as a diplomat for the Earth government. He had spent 20 years learning how to smile and nod and find ways to make different species work together. But today was different. Today, his 16-year-old son, Alex, was with him. Alex Morrison was everything his father hoped he would become. Smart, curious, kind to everyone he met, and brave enough to explore new places without fear. The boy had begged his father to let him come on this trip, his first time leaving the Sol system. Jake had finally agreed, thinking it would be good for Alex to see how big the galaxy was and how many different kinds of people lived in it. The boy was supposed to stay in the diplomatic compound while his father worked, but Alex was young and full of energy. He had made friends with Danny Brooks, the son of one of the human security officers, and the two teenagers had been exploring the cultural district of the capital city. It was supposed to be safe. The Zephrians had promised that the area was open to all visitors and that human guests would be protected under diplomatic law. Alex and Danny were walking through the Grand Plaza, looking at the strange art displays and trying to figure out what the different Zephrian symbols meant. The plaza was huge, big enough to hold 50,000 people, with a raised platform in the center where important ceremonies took place. All around the edges stood tall poles, topped with ceremonial staffs that belonged to different noble families. Boys were being careful, staying on the marked paths and not touching anything they were not supposed to touch. But as they walked past one of the ceremonial poles, a group of Zephrian children ran between them, playing some kind of game that involved a lot of running and shouting. Alex stepped aside to get out of their way, and as he did, his shoulder bumped into the pole. The ceremonial staff on top wobbled for a moment, then fell to the ground with a sharp crack that seemed to echo across the entire plaza. The crystal head of the staff, carved in the shape of a snarling beast, split into 3 pieces. Everything went silent. Every Zephrian in the plaza stopped what they were doing and turned to stare at the 2 human boys standing next to the broken staff. Alex's face went white as he realized what had happened. He bent down to pick up the pieces, hoping maybe they could be fixed somehow. That was when Prince Kyltur arrived. The prince was the eldest son of Emperor Vextar Zeph, and he looked exactly like what people expected when they thought of Zephrian nobility. He was tall and thin, with purple scales that seemed to shimmer in the light and golden eyes that held no warmth at all. He wore robes made from some kind of fabric that looked like liquid silver, and when he moved, it was like watching a snake getting ready to strike. Prince Kylter looked at the broken staff, then at Alex, then back at the staff. When he spoke, his voice was cold and sharp. "You have destroyed the ceremonial staff of House Mordar, one of the oldest noble families in the Empire. This is a crime punishable by death under our ancient laws." Alex tried to explain that it was an accident, that he had not meant to touch the pole at all, but the prince did not want to hear it. Within minutes, Zephrian guards had surrounded the two boys. Danny was released because he had not touched the staff, but Alex was taken away in chains that were too heavy for his young body. Captain Morrison was in a meeting with trade officials when Colonel Lisa Hayes burst through the door. The security chief's face was grim as she delivered the news that every parent fears most. "Sir, they have your son. They say he broke some kind of ceremonial object and that he has to die for it." Jake felt like the world had stopped spinning. He could not breathe, could not think, could not understand how his boy's life could suddenly be in danger for something so small. He ran from the meeting room to the Grand Plaza, where a crowd was already gathering. The Zephrians loved public executions, especially when the victim was from what they called a lesser species. The next few hours were a nightmare that Jake would remember for the rest of his life. He begged and pleaded with every Zephrian official he could find. He offered money, technology, anything the Empire wanted if they would just spare his sons. Life. But the laws were clear, they said. The ceremonial staff had been broken by human hands, and human blood had to pay for it. Emperor Vextar Zeph received Jake in his throne room, a massive chamber with walls made of the same crystal as the city's spires. The emperor sat on a throne, carved from a single black stone, surrounded by his three sons, Prince Kylter, Prince Nextar, and Prince Zortar. All of them looked at Jake like he was some kind of insect that had crawled into their presence. "Your Spawn has committed a grave offense against our empire," the emperor said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "The law is clear. Death is the only payment that will satisfy the ancestors of House Mordar." Jake dropped to his knees, something he had never done in his entire life. "Please, Your Majesty, he is just a child. He meant no harm. Surely there must be some other way to handle this." "There is no other way," Prince Kylter said, stepping forward. "Your inferior species must learn that there are consequences for disrespecting our culture. The boy dies today, in front of the entire city, so that all may see what happens to those who dare to damage Zephrian property." At exactly 14:37 local time, Alex Morrison was brought to the execution platform in the center of the Grand Plaza. 10,000 Zephrians had gathered to watch, their golden eyes gleaming with excitement. The boy was scared. Jake could see that, but he held his head high as they forced him to kneel on the cold stone. The executioner was a massive Zephrian warrior carrying an energy blade that hummed with deadly power. Alex looked up into the crowd and found his father's face among all the alien features staring down at him. Their eyes met across the distance, and the boy smiled. "Tell my dad I wasn't scared," Alex said, his young voice carrying clearly through the silence. The energy blade fell, and Jake Morrison's world ended. The crowd cheered as his son's body crumpled to the platform. They celebrated the death of a 16-year-old boy who had done nothing wrong except be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jake stood frozen on the diplomatic viewing platform, watching his child's blood spread across the ancient stones. Behind him, Colonel Hayes was speaking quietly into her communicator, her voice steady despite the horror they had just witnessed. "Priority Alpha. Code Red. Execute immediately." The Zephrians had just made the biggest mistake in their empire's long history. They had killed a human child in front of his father, and they had done it with pride and joy. They thought they were teaching the galaxy a lesson about Zephrian power and superiority. Instead, they had just signed their own death warrant. Colonel Lisa Hayes stood behind Captain Morrison as he watched his son die, her hand resting on the small communication device clipped to her uniform. She had been waiting for this moment, hoping it would never come, but knowing that someday it might. Every human who worked in deep space, every diplomat who dealt with alien governments, every parent who brought their children beyond Earth's protection, they all knew about Protocol 7. The protocol had been created 50 years ago, after the first human colonists were killed by the Vegan Republic. Back then, humanity had been weak and scattered, with no real military to speak of. They had to accept the vegan government's apology and a small payment for the dead colonists. The families of those killed had demanded justice, but Earth's government could do nothing except promise that such a thing would never happen again. That promise had led to the creation of the Human Defense Initiative, a secret military organization that spent decades preparing for the day when another alien government would murder human civilians. They built ships in hidden shipyards far from Earth, trained soldiers in ways of war that no other species had ever seen, and developed weapons technology that made humanity's public military look like children playing with toys. Protocol 7 was simple in concept, but devastating in execution. If any human civilian was murdered by an alien government, especially a child, then every human military asset in the galaxy would immediately converge on the offending species and deliver what the protocol called proportional justice. The punishment would be swift, complete, and designed to make sure that no other alien government would ever think about harming humans again. As Alex Morrison's blood spread across the execution platform, Colonel Hayes activated her communicator and spoke the words that would change the galaxy forever. Control, this is Hayes. Priority Alpha Authentication 7-7-9-Black. Code Red Authorization confirmed. Execute Protocol 7 immediately. The response came back within seconds. Confirmed, Colonel Hayes. Protocol 7 is now active. All assets are being notified. Justice will be delivered. At that moment, across the galaxy, every human ship, station, and colony received the same message. It appeared on screens in the middle of important meetings, interrupted conversations between lovers, and woke sleeping children from their dreams. The message was short and simple, but every human who read it felt their blood turn cold. Alert! Protocol 7 has been activated. A human child has been murdered by the Zephrian Empire. All military assets will respond immediately. Justice will be swift and complete. Estimated time to target, 57 minutes. Admiral Kate Sullivan was having dinner with her senior staff aboard the battleship Earth's Vengeance when the message appeared on every screen in the dining room. She had been Jake Morrison's roommate at the Space Academy 20 years ago, back when they were both young and full of dreams about exploring the galaxy and making friends with alien species. She knew about his son, Alex, had even met the boy. During a visit to Earth 2 years earlier, the Admiral stood up slowly, her face becoming hard as stone. Around the table, her officers were reading the message with growing anger and determination. These were not the kind of people who joined the regular Earth Navy. These were volunteers for the Human Defense Initiative, men and women who had spent their entire careers preparing for this exact moment. All ships, battle stations, Admiral, Sullivan said, her voice carrying easily through the ship's communication system. Initiate jump sequence to Zephyros Prime. We have 57 minutes to deliver justice for a murdered human child. The Earth's Vengeance was not alone. 42 other ships received the same orders and began moving toward the Zephrian home world. These were not exploration vessels or cargo haulers. They were instruments of war, built in secret over decades of careful planning. Each ship was twice the size of anything in the public Earth Navy, armed with weapons that had never been seen in battle, crewed by soldiers who had trained their entire lives for this mission. On Zephyros Prime, a Zephrian, Military detected the approaching human fleet, but did not seem worried about it. General Rexstar Zeph, the Emperor's brother and commander of all Imperial forces, laughed when his sensors reported the incoming ships. 43 human vessels approaching our system, he told Emperor Vexstar over the communication link. They seem upset about the execution of their spawn. Shall I destroy them when they arrive? Do whatever you think is best, the Emperor replied, still sitting on his throne and admiring the recordings of Alex Morrison's death. But leave a few alive so they can return to their homeworld and tell everyone what happens when inferior. Species challenged the Zephrian Empire. General Rexstar had good reason to be confident. The Zephrian fleet consisted of over 200 warships, each one armed with the most advanced weapons that the Empire's scientists could create. They had never lost a battle in over 1,000 years. Their energy shields could stop any known weapon, and their plasma cannons could destroy entire cities with a single shot. What the Zephrians did not know was that humanity had been studying their technology for decades. Every trade mission, every diplomatic visit, every cultural exchange had included human intelligence agents who carefully observed and recorded everything they saw. The Human Defense Initiative knew exactly how Zephrian shields worked, exactly how powerful their weapons were, and exactly how to defeat them. Captain Morrison remained on the planet's surface, playing his role as a grieving father who was cooperating with the diplomatic process. The Zephrians wanted to return Alex's body to human space as quickly as possible, hoping to avoid any further trouble. They had no idea that the quiet man standing next to his son's covered form was actually a trained killer who had spent 15 years working for Earth intelligence before becoming a diplomat. The security team that Morrison had brought with him consisted of 12 people who the Zephrians thought were simple bodyguards. In reality, they were members of the Human Defense Initiative's Special Operations Division, led by Major Ryan Clark. Each one of them was worth 100 regular soldiers, trained in weapons and tactics that would have impressed even the most. Experienced Zephrian warriors. As the human fleet moved closer to Zephyros Prime, Major Clark and his team began preparing for their own mission. While Admiral Sullivan dealt with the Zephrian fleet in space, they would handle the Imperial family on the ground. Every member of the royal bloodline, every noble who had cheered at Alex Morrison's execution, every official who had supported the death sentence, all of them were marked for elimination. The Major checked his weapon, a device that looked like a simple energy pistol but could punch through Zephrian armor like it was made of paper. Around him, his team was making their own preparations, checking equipment, and reviewing the layout of the Imperial Palace. They had been planning this mission for years, hoping they would never have to use their knowledge. Remember, Major Clark told his soldiers, we are not here for conquest. We are not here to steal anything or claim territory. We are here for one reason only, to make sure that every alien government in the galaxy understands what happens when they murder human children. Colonel Hayes stood next to Captain Morrison, both of them watching the Zephrian officials who were preparing Alex's body for transport. The aliens were being very careful and respectful now, treating the dead boy's remains like they were made of the finest crystal. They seemed to think that showing proper respect for the dead would somehow make up for the fact that they had murdered an innocent child. How long? Morrison asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. 32 minutes, Hayes replied, checking her chronometer. Admiral Sullivan has never missed a deadline. The Zephrians continued their preparations, completely unaware that their empire had less than half an hour left to exist. Emperor Vexstar was already planning a celebration feast to honor the successful execution of the human boy. Prince Kylter was composing a message to be sent to all the other alien governments, describing how the mighty Zephrian Empire had taught the humans a lesson about respecting superior species. None of them noticed the small smile that crossed Captain Morrison's face as he looked down at his son's body. Alex would be avenged, and the galaxy would learn that humanity was not the weak and peaceful species that everyone thought they were. The boy's death would be the last mistake that the Zephrian Empire ever made. 57 minutes after Alex Morrison died on the execution platform, the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyros system. The sight that greeted the Zephrian sensor operators was unlike anything they had ever seen before in their long military careers. The ships that emerged from the swirling energy of hyperspace were not the small diplomatic vessels, merchant craft that humanity usually sent to alien worlds. These were predators made of metal and energy, sleek and deadly, their hulls black as the space between stars. Each one was enormous, dwarfing even the largest Zephrian battleships, and they moved through space with a grace that seemed impossible. For something so massive, Admiral Sullivan's flagship, the Earth's Vengeance, was a sight that would have terrified anyone who understood what they were looking at. The ship was over 2 kilometers long, shaped like a great sword pointed at the heart of the Zephrian Empire. Along its hull, weapon ports glowed with barely contained energy, and the space around it seemed to bend and twist as its advanced drive systems prepared for battle. On the bridge of the Earth's Vengeance, Admiral Sullivan stood before the main viewing screen, watching as Zephyros Prime grew larger ahead of them. She could see the crystal spires of the capital city glinting in the light of the twin suns, could see the orbital defense platforms that surrounded the planet like a crown of thorns. In just a few minutes, all of it would be gone. Communications. "Open a channel to all Zephrian vessels," she ordered, her voice calm and steady despite the rage burning in her heart. The communication officer, a young woman named Lieutenant Carol Price, worked quickly at her console. "Channel open, Admiral. All Zephrian ships are receiving." Admiral Sullivan took a deep breath and spoke words that would echo through galactic history. "Zephrian vessels. This is Admiral Kate Sullivan of the Human Defense Fleet. You have murdered an innocent human child in violation of all civilized law. You have 1 minute to surrender unconditionally and prepare to face justice. This is your only warning." On the bridge of the Zephrian flagship Crown of Empire, Emperor Vextar listened to the human admiral's message with growing amusement. He was surrounded by his 3 sons and his top military advisors, all of them laughing at the audacity of the inferior human species. "1 minute to surrender," Prince Kylter said, his golden eyes gleaming with mockery. "These humans truly believe they can threaten the mighty Zephrian Empire with their pathetic little fleet." General Rexstar Zeph was studying the tactical displays, counting the human ships and comparing them to his own massive fleet. 43 human vessels against our 200 warships, Your Majesty. They are either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid." Emperor Vextar rose from his command throne, his purple scales shimmering in the bridge's artificial light. "Let them come," he declared, his voice carrying to every ship in his fleet. "We will destroy them all and send their wreckage back to Earth as a message. No inferior species threatens the Zephrian Empire and lives to tell about it." A minute passed quickly, and Admiral Sullivan watched as the Zephrian fleet began moving into attack formation. 200 ships arranged themselves in the classic Zephrian battle pattern, with the heaviest warships in the center and smaller vessels spread out on the flanks. It was a formation that had brought them victory in 1,000 battles over centuries. "All ships, this is Admiral Sullivan," she said over the fleet communication channel. "You know why we are here today. A human child was murdered by these creatures, executed like a common criminal for the crime of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. We are here to make sure that no alien government ever makes that mistake again." The response from her captains was immediate and unanimous. "Understood, Admiral." "Justice will be served. Weapons free," Admiral Sullivan ordered. Show them what happens when they hurt our children. The battle that followed would be studied in military academies for centuries to come, not because it was long or complicated, but because it demonstrated just how badly the galaxy had underestimated human military capability. The first human weapon to fire was something the Zephrians had never seen before. It looked like a simple energy beam, but when it struck the Zephrian flagship shields, the supposedly impenetrable barrier simply vanished like smoke in the wind. The beam continued through the ship's armor, plating as if it were not there at all, and the crown of Empire shuddered as massive explosions tore through its interior. Within seconds, every human ship was firing, and the space around Zephyros Prime lit up like a miniature star. The weapons that humanity had spent decades developing in secret revealed themselves in all their terrible glory. Energy beams that could phase through any known defense, kinetic projectiles that moved at significant fractions of light speed, and most frightening of all, some kind of technology that could disable enemy ships without even touching them. The Zephrian fleet, proud and mighty just moments before, began falling apart like a house built from cards. Ships that had never known defeat found their weapons powerless and their shields useless. The energy cannons that had conquered star systems could not even scratch the hulls of the human vessels, while human weapons tore through Zephrian armor like it was made of tissue paper. General Rexstar watched in growing horror as half his fleet was destroyed or disabled in the first minute of combat. "This is impossible," he whispered, staring at the tactical display that showed Zephrian ships dying by the dozens. "Our technology is the most advanced in the galaxy. How can these humans be doing this to us?" Prince Nexstar, the Emperor's second son, was frantically working at his console, trying to understand what was happening. "Their weapons are not following any known laws of physics," he reported, his voice cracking with fear. "Our shields are designed to stop energy weapons, but these beams are passing right through them, like they are not even there." Emperor Vextar stood frozen on his bridge, watching his mighty empire crumble before his eyes. The fleet that had never known defeat was being systematically destroyed by an enemy they had dismissed as inferior just minutes earlier. Ships that had served the Empire for centuries were exploding in brilliant flashes of light, their crews dying before they even understood what was killing them. "All ships retreat," he finally ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Return to the planet's surface. We will make our stand there." But when the surviving Zephrian ships tried to flee, they discovered that their engines would not respond. Every vessel in the fleet, from the mightiest battleship to the smallest fighter, found itself locked in place by some kind of human technology that they could not understand or counter. "Sir," reported the Crown of Empire's chief engineer, his purple scales pale with terror, "our engines have been remotely disabled. We cannot move." On the surface of Zephyros Prime, Captain Morrison finally allowed his diplomatic mask to slip. The quiet, grieving father who had spent the last hour cooperating with Zephrian officials transformed into something much more dangerous. Major Clark and his team moved to positions around the Grand Plaza, their weapons ready, their faces hard. With determination. "Sir," Colonel Haas said, checking her communicator, "Admiral Sullivan reports that the Zephrian fleet has been neutralized. No human casualties. All enemy vessels are disabled and ready for boarding." Morrison looked down at his son's covered body, then up at the crystal spires of the capital city where the imperial family was probably cowering in their palace. "Good," he said quietly. "Now it is time for the real justice to begin." Above them, the human fleet moved into orbit around Zephyros Prime, their weapons trained on the planet's surface. The mighty Zephrian Empire, which had ruled 12 star systems for 3,000 years, had just learned that there were some lines that should never be crossed. The battle in space had lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. The war for justice was just beginning. The human boarding pods launched from the Earth's vengeance like a swarm of angry wasps, each one carrying a team of soldiers who had trained their entire lives for this moment. Commander Beth Rodriguez led the assault on the crown of empire, the Zephrian flagship that now hung dead in space, its engines disabled and its weapons powerless. The boarding pods were unlike anything the Zephrians had ever encountered. Instead of trying to cut through the hull or find docking ports, they simply passed through the ship's armor like it was made of air. The Zephrian crew watched in terror as human soldiers materialized inside their vessel, appearing in corridors and command centers as if they had walked through solid walls. Commander Rodriguez was the first human to set foot on the crown of empire, her weapon ready and her face hidden behind a combat helmet that made her look like some kind of demon from Zephrian nightmares. Behind her came 11 other soldiers, each one moving with deadly precision through the ship's passages. The Zephrian Marines, who tried to stop them, discovered that their weapons were useless. Energy blasts that should have killed the humans passed harmlessly through their armor, while return fire from human weapons cut through Zephrian battlesuits like they were made of paper. Within minutes, the entire ship was under human control. Emperor Vextar found himself trapped on his own bridge, surrounded by human soldiers who had appeared out of nowhere. His 3 sons cowered beside him, their golden eyes wide with terror as they realized that their mighty empire was crumbling around them. "This is impossible," Prince Kylter whispered, staring at the humans who stood before them. "We are the chosen of the gods. No inferior species can defeat us like this." Commander Rodriguez removed her helmet, revealing the face of a young woman who looked barely older than Alex Morrison had been. But her eyes held no mercy, no compassion for the aliens who had murdered an innocent child. "Your gods are not here to help you," she said, her voice cold as space itself. "But justice is." The same scene was playing out across the entire Zephrian fleet. Human boarding parties moved through ship after ship, capturing or killing anyone who resisted. The proud warriors of the Zephrian Empire, who had conquered dozens of worlds and enslaved entire species, found themselves helpless against an enemy they had never imagined could exist. On the surface of Zephyros Prime, Major Clark and his team were executing their own mission with surgical precision. They had spent years studying the layout of the capital city, memorizing every street and building, planning for this exact scenario. Now all that preparation was paying off. The team moved through the city like ghosts, their advanced camouflage systems making them invisible to Zephrian eyes. They disabled security systems, eliminated guards, and cleared a path to the Grand Palace where the rest of the imperial family was hiding. Captain Morrison walked calmly through the streets of the capital, no longer bothering to hide his true nature. The diplomatic protocol officer, who had spent weeks smiling and bowing to Zephrian officials, was gone, replaced by the trained killer that he had always been underneath. His weapon was in his hand, and his face showed no emotion except cold determination. The Grand Palace was a massive structure built from the same crystal as the city's spires, its walls reaching high into the purple sky. Thousands of Zephrian nobles and officials had gathered inside, thinking that the thick walls would protect them from the human attack. They were wrong. Major Clark's team moved through the palace like a force of nature, their weapons cutting through Zephrian guards and their technology bypassing every security system the Empire had ever built. They captured every member of the royal family, every noble who had cheered at Alex Morrison's execution, every official who had supported the barbaric sentence. The aliens were dragged from their hiding places and brought to the same Grand Plaza where the human boy had died just hours earlier. The execution platform, still stained with Alex's blood, would serve justice once again. Prince Zortar, the youngest of the Emperor's sons, tried to run when the humans came for him. He made it 3 steps before Major Clark's weapon dropped. Him to the ground, his purple blood mixing with the ancient stones of the palace floor. The prince who had laughed at a child's death learned what it felt like to die in terror and pain in space. Admiral Sullivan watched the tactical displays as her boarding teams completed their missions. Every Zephrian ship was now under human control, their crews either captured or dead. The mighty fleet that had ruled the Andromeda sector for centuries had been reduced to floating scrap metal in less than an hour. "Admiral," reported her communications officer, "Major Clark signals that all primary targets have been secured. The Imperial family is in custody." "Very good," Admiral Sullivan replied, her voice carrying no satisfaction despite their complete victory. "Signal Captain Morrison that we are ready to proceed with the final phase." Captain Morrison stood in the Grand Plaza, looking at the spot where his son had been murdered. Around him, hundreds of Zephrian nobles and officials knelt in chains, their proud heads bowed in defeat. The execution platform had been prepared, the same energy blade that had killed Alex Morrison, waiting to deliver Justice. Emperor Vextar was brought forward first, his purple scales dulled with fear, and his golden eyes no longer holding any trace of the arrogance that had defined his rule. The alien who had ordered a child's death for the crime of accidentally breaking a ceremonial object now faced his own execution for the crime of murdering an innocent human. "You cannot do this," the Emperor said, his voice cracking with desperation. "We are a sovereign empire. The Galactic Council will never allow such a violation of interstellar law." Morrison looked down at the creature who had killed his son, feeling nothing but cold emptiness where his heart used to be. "The Galactic Council will learn today that humanity does not negotiate with child murderers," he replied. "They will also learn what happens to anyone who threatens our young." Prince Kylter was dragged forward next, the alien who had discovered the broken ceremonial staff and demanded Alex's death. He tried to maintain his dignity, but his body shook with terror as he was forced to kneel beside his father. "This is madness," he whispered. "We are the rulers of 12 star systems. We have armies and fleets and allies who will avenge us." "Your fleets are destroyed," Morrison said calmly. "Your armies are surrendering to human forces across all 12 systems. As for your allies, they are watching this broadcast and learning what happens when anyone harms human children." The third son, Prince Nextar, was silent as he was brought to the platform. He had seen what happened to his brother Zortar when he tried to run, and he knew that begging would not save him. The alien who had helped plan Alex Morrison's execution could only wait for his own death to claim him. Admiral Sullivan's voice echoed across the plaza through the ship's communication system, her words being broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. "Citizens of the Zephrian Empire, and all who watch this transmission, your royal family has been found guilty of the premeditated murder of an innocent human child. Justice will now be served according to the ancient laws that they used to justify their crime." The energy blade hummed to life, its deadly glow reflecting off the crystal spires of the capital city. In just a few moments, a dynasty that had ruled for 3,000 years would come to an end, and the galaxy would learn that humanity was not the peaceful species everyone thought they were. Morrison raised the weapon that had killed his son, preparing to use it one final time in the name of justice. Around him, the human soldiers stood ready to eliminate every other member of the royal bloodline, ensuring that the mistake of murdering human children would never be repeated. The reckoning had begun. At exactly 1537 local time, 1 hour after Alex Morrison had been murdered on the same platform, Captain Morrison activated the energy blade that would end the Zephrian royal bloodline forever. The weapon hummed with the same deadly power that had taken his son's life, but now it would serve justice instead of cruelty. Emperor Vextar Zeph, ruler of 12 star systems and master of countless worlds, died with a whimper rather than the roar of defiance that his subjects might have expected. The alien who had ordered a child's execution for breaking a ceremonial object discovered that his own death was neither ceremonial nor dignified. It was simply the end of a life that had caused too much pain. Prince Kylter followed his father into death moments later, the energy blade cutting through his neck with the same efficiency it had shown with Alex Morrison. A prince who had demanded justice for a broken staff received the only justice that mattered, payment for an innocent life taken in cruelty and pride. Prince Nextar closed his golden eyes as the blade approached, perhaps thinking of all the decisions that had led to this moment. He had stood beside his father and brothers as they condemned a human child to death, had smiled as the boy was dragged away in chains, had watched with satisfaction as the execution took place. Now he would join his family in whatever afterlife awaited creatures who murdered children for sport. The crowds of Zephrians who had gathered to watch the executions stood in complete silence. These were the same aliens who had cheered and celebrated when Alex Morrison died, who had thought his death was entertainment worthy of a holiday. Now they watched their own rulers die and understood for the first time what it meant to be on the receiving end of such brutal justice. Clark moved through the crowd of captured nobles with methodical precision, his weapon selecting targets with the same cold efficiency that a farmer might use to harvest crops. Every Zephrian who had called for Alex's death, every official who had refused to show mercy to a child, every noble who had cheered as the boy was murdered, all of them paid the price for their cruelty. The executions were broadcast live across the galaxy, transmitted on every communication frequency that human technology could access. Alien governments on hundreds of worlds watched in stunned silence as the mighty Zephrian Empire was systematically destroyed by a species they had all considered weak and peaceful. On the bridge of the Earth's vengeance, Admiral Sullivan monitored the transmissions going out to every corner of known space. The message was simple and clear. Humanity would no longer tolerate the murder of their civilians, especially their children. Any government that made such a mistake would face the same fate as the Zephrian royal family. Admiral, reported Lieutenant Price from the communication station, we are receiving responses from alien governments across the galaxy. The Andromedan Council is requesting immediate negotiations. The Vegan Republic is offering to pay reparations for the colonists they killed 50 years ago. The Centauri Federation wants to sign a formal treaty guaranteeing the safety of all human civilians in their territory. Admiral Sullivan nodded grimly. Tell them all the same thing. Any government that harms human civilians will be destroyed completely. No negotiations, no treaties, no exceptions. They can either protect our people, or they can share the fate of the Zephrian Empire. On the surface of Zephyros Prime, Captain Morrison finished his work and walked slowly away from the execution platform. Behind him, the bodies of the Imperial family lay where they had fallen, their purple blood mixing with the stains left by his son's death. The platform that had been built to celebrate Zephrian power and superiority was now a monument to the price of murdering human children. Major Clark's team continued their systematic elimination of the royal bloodline, moving through the palace and the surrounding buildings to find every last member of the family that had ruled the empire for 3,000 years. Cousins, aunts, uncles, distant relatives, anyone who carried the blood of the imperial line was marked for death. Took most of the night, but by dawn, not a single member of the Zephrian royal family remained alive. A dynasty that had seemed eternal, that had conquered worlds and enslaved species, that had believed itself chosen by the gods to rule over all others, was completely extinct. The Zephrian Empire collapsed within days of the royal family's death. Without their rulers and with their fleet destroyed, the various sectors and colonies declared independence or were absorbed by neighboring powers. Some worlds surrendered immediately to human forces, begging for mercy and promising to protect any human civilians who entered their territory. The planet Zephyros Prime was abandoned by its own people, who fled in whatever ships they could find, rather than remain on a world that had become cursed in their eyes. The crystal spires that had once been symbols of imperial power stood empty and silent, monuments to the folly of underestimating human resolve. Admiral Sullivan established a permanent human garrison in the Zephyros system, not as conquerors, but as a reminder of what happened when humanity's children were threatened. The ships of the human defense fleet patrolled the empty space where the Zephrian fleet had once ruled, ensuring that no other species would forget the lesson that had been taught here. A simple plaque was installed in the Grand Plaza, bolted to the execution platform where both Alex Morrison and the Imperial family had died. The words were written in every major galactic language, but their meaning was unmistakable. Here died Alex Morrison, age 16, son of Earth. His murderers learned too late that humanity protects its own. Let all who would harm human children remember this place and choose wisely. The galactic political landscape changed overnight. Trade agreements that had taken years to negotiate were signed within days, with alien governments falling over themselves to demonstrate their friendship with humanity. Immigration laws were rewritten to give human civilians special protection. Diplomatic immunity for humans was expanded to cover not just officials, but any human traveling in alien territory. Captain Morrison returned to Earth with his son's body, retiring from diplomatic service to a small farm in the countryside, where he could grieve in peace. He never spoke publicly about the events on Zephyros Prime, never gave interviews or wrote memoirs about the day his son was murdered and an empire died in response. But every human parent in the galaxy knew his story, knew that somewhere in the darkness between the stars, Admiral Sullivan and her fleet continued their eternal patrol. The ships of the human defense fleet moved through space like guardian angels, ensuring that Alex Morrison's death would be the last of its kind. Children on Earth learned about Alex Morrison in their history classes, about the boy who had died far from home and the justice that followed his death. They learned that humanity was not the weak and defenseless species that many aliens had believed, that beneath the peaceful exterior lay a strength that could reshape the galaxy. When their young were threatened, the other species learned too. Alien parents began teaching their children about the humans, about the species that looked fragile but could become utterly ruthless when their families were harmed. They learned to treat human civilians with respect and kindness, not out of friendship, but out of fear of what would happen if they did not. Years passed, and the galaxy settled into a new order where human children could travel safely to any world, protected not by treaties or laws, but by the memory of what had happened to those who had harmed them before. The Zephrian Empire became a cautionary tale told in alien schools, a reminder that some lines should never be crossed. Alex Morrison, the 16-year-old boy who had been executed for accidentally breaking a ceremonial staff, became something more than just another victim of alien cruelty. He became a symbol of humanity's true nature, proof that the peaceful species everyone thought they knew was capable of bringing justice to those who hurt the innocent. The galaxy had learned its lesson well. No human child would ever again die for the entertainment of alien crowds, and no government would ever again make the mistake of believing that humanity was too weak to defend its own.